I want to thank everybody for taking time out of their busy schedules to be here. Everybody, not just around the horseshoe, but in this room, have really done yeoman's work on the issue related to Camp Ellis and coastal erosion. And today will be one of many meetings, I'm sure, moving forward where we are focused on coordination and stakeholder engagement. I just wanted to make a note that the Department of Environmental Protection Commissioner Jerry Reed had this on the docket, was prepared to be here, but found out early this morning that his mother, who's in hospice, has really taken a turn for the worse. So we really want to have our thoughts and prayers with his family today. But we are joined by Marybeth Richardson, who is the head of the Portland office of DEP. So we're thankful that Marybeth can be here. We'll begin with introductions, and then I'll run through what we're going to be talking about today and our objectives, and then we'll get right into the agenda. So I'll start off. I'm State Senator Justin Chenette. I represent Saco, Old Orchard Beach, Hollis, and Leamington, and Buxton in the State Senate, and I serve on the Environment and Natural Resources Committee and a member of the Maine Climate Council's Coastal and Marine Working Group. Representative Gramlich?
Hi, I'm Lori Gramlich. I represent Old Orchard Beach, which is House District 13, and I also serve with Senator Chenette on the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, and actually had a piece of legislation that passed out of our committee, an act to protect Maine's beaches and shoreline, and we'll may get into this a little bit later, but there's a couple of beach reports that have been done in 2006 and then again in 2017 that had some recommendations for the department to implement to mitigate some of the issues relative to beach erosion. So thank you for having me into your fair city.
Welcome. My name is Donna Bailey. I represent House District 14, which is the part of Saco that includes Camp Ellis.
Rick Millard, Saco Shoreline Commission Chairman, and I'll have more to say later on.
William Doyle, Mayor of Saco. I just want to reiterate what Justin said. Thank you all for coming and taking time out of your day. Thank you for the state legislation, state delegation, and federal delegation for being here today and helping to make us move forward on this all-important issue.
Good morning, Bryan. Kaenrath, Saco City District.
Kevin Roach, President of Save Our Shores, Saco Bay, also on the Shoreline Commission and the ex-councilor from Ward 4.
Senator Chenette, Marybeth Richardson. I'm the director of the DEP Southern Maine office in Portland. But before I became director, I was the licensing manager, so I had a lot of interactions with Camp Ellis and trying to deal with the erosion issues down there. So Jerry had already invited me to this, so I'm glad I could be here. Thank you for coming.
Good morning, everyone. Peter Smolinski from the Maine Geological Survey. Our agriculture, conservation, and forestry, and involved in resiliency issues in Maine for a number of years now. Also serving on the community resilience, emergency management, and public health subcommittee, the town council, and also helping with the science and technology.
Good morning, I'm Steve Dixon with the Maine Geological Survey, working with Pete and some of the agencies and people working down there.
Patrick Fox, Public Works Director here in Saco. Kind of working on trying to keep our shoreline patched together while we wait for bigger and better projects since 2005.
Good morning, Bob Martin. I'm a state geologist and director of the Maine Geological Survey. So Pete and Steve work with me.
Wonderful. Anybody in that row want to introduce themselves? I see a few folks here from the federal delegation and a few other folks. Did you want to introduce yourselves?
Alice Ella, with Senator Susan Collins' office.
Yeah, I'm from Chellie Pingree office. Bonnie Popular, Senator Allen, Pingree office.
Great Wood, Saco Shoreline. Yes, the West Saco Bay Shoreline Commission as well.
And Carmen Shoreline.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you all for being here. So just to run through, everybody has an agenda, correct? Okay. So we'll start off with a recap of where we're at. That'll be a presentation from Rick and the Shoreline Commission, just to kind of understand again sort of where we have come from on this issue, and then sort of where we're at in terms of where we need to go for next steps. We'll then talk about the council resolution and the steps that the city has been taking over the last year plus, the letter from the feds, particularly from the Army Corps that we received last month, and then there was a suggestion to talk specifically about Ferry Beach State Park and the erosion issues that are taking place there. So we'll briefly talk in depth about that. And then expectations from the city of Saco to the state. How can the state play a role, more so than we have done in the past, to try to move this forward? Whether we're talking specifically about the sort of jetty fix, or we're talking just coastal erosion in general, how the DEP can play a role, should it also be the governor's administration, and then also how the legislature can play a role. And so we'll talk about a possible state partnership and what the city is expecting from that partnership. As Representative Gramlich had alluded to, there's a number of different bills and different committees working on a variety of different things related to protection of our coastal communities, not just Saco, but our surrounding area and all up and down Maine's coast. So we'll talk briefly about that. And then actionable next steps. We'll all have hopefully homework assignments coming from this meeting and talk about what each of us can do as part of this partnership, and then where we need to be communicating with who at every step of the way, and what vehicle we're going to be using to continue these stakeholder conversations. So Rick, do you want to take it away?
Thank you very much, and thank you for being here this morning. What we're trying to do at this point is introduce and involve state officials in the economic situation that exists here in Saco as a result of the bay erosion. We want to expand what the Corps has already done so that we can deal with the damage that has taken place over the entire bay rather than just the limited area that was suggested by the Corps. We would like to develop something that is federally implementable, that'll address all of the bay issues that we're facing, and develop an estimate for that in support of a design, and then get federal acceptance of the responsibility of the liabilities that exist from the damage that is caused by the jetty all along the coast and not just here in Saco. This is a view of the Camp Ellis area, and it pretty much defines how the Corps defines their project. And all of their analysis and all of their review are limited to this section of the beach. The black lines on this picture depict different shorelines and the shoreline recession that's taken place over time. The earliest from 1908. The latest on this diagram is 1998. So the situation has gotten worse since this condition has concerned by 20 years. The red lines on the document represent the lot lines of the city. And from that, between the black lines, you can see how many lots have been lost by the city. Many of those were populated with homes. When we look at the whole bay, the bracket just adjacent to the Camp Ellis jetty shows the size of the federal project as opposed to the entire bay. We've also defined the areas where there is other damage along the beach. Certainly damage, a home lost in 2019. Erosion at the Ferry Beach State Park. There's erosion that takes place in and around the mouth of the Goosefair Brook, and certainly accretion that takes place in the Nonsuch River. The Little River, which is marked at the top just adjacent to the Saco Marsh, was actually an outlet for the Scarborough Marsh, and it's been closed for more than 100 years because of the erosion that we've seen. This defines an area that is just adjacent to the home that was demolished in 2019 and sits in front of the Ferry Beach Park Association. It comes from Maine Geological, where they have been monitoring the beach situation over time. From 2003 to 2019, that black arrow in the middle, double-headed, defines 67 feet of beach that's been lost in that time frame. This is evidence of the beach moving, the beach erosion moving farther and farther north. And Ferry Beach State Park, which used to be one of the most attended parks in the state, is just north of that and is suffering from a lot of reduced participation because of the lack of beach. The city of Saco over time has lost better than $2.5 million in revenues and home values. We've lost 38 homes at better than almost $5 million, with tax revenue lost of better than $3 million, and infrastructure and maintenance repairs that have taken place from 1960 to 2020 of over $12 million. And the total, as you see it. When we look at the bay, we see the home that was demolished. We see the erosion neutral point that existed in 2006. That point has moved to Goose Fair Brook, and that was as of 2017. The erosion is continuing to move north, and as it moves north, and if you take the rates and the time that it took to move from 6 to 17 and extrapolate that, by 2039 the erosion will be at the Old Orchard Beach Pier. During all of this movement, the Nonsuch River keeps getting plugged with sand due to the accretion and the movement of the sand from the south to the north. In addition, there are environmental damages that take place within the Scarborough Marsh with sand indentation, and Goose Fair Brook, where it is also inundated with sand. When we look at the bay, the communities involved are all suffering these common damages. Biddeford sees eroded beaches through the Hills Beach area with the associated decrease in home values and the loss of taxes as a result. And they also face reduced tourist income at Biddeford Crossing. Saco has lost 38 homes, has eroded beaches for its entire length, eroded home values, lost revenue and taxes, and a major decrease in tax revenue. Over the last year, as a result of the dredging that took place in a placement of 68,000 cubic yards of sand, at the south end of the beach adjacent to the jetty, it enjoyed a noticeable revival as far as participation by tourists and local people coming to the beach. Just that addition of that little sand has made a tremendous difference. I haven't seen that much activity in that area in more than 10 years. Rachel, go ahead.
Where did the 68,000 cubic pounds of sand, is that what you said?
Yes, it came from the dredge in the river.
Okay.
Federal dredge.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Rachel Carson is suffering damages due to the outflow being closed on occasion and the ecological damage of sand infiltration. The city of Old Orchard faces damage from the shoaling and erosion that's taking place at Goose Fair Brook, which happens to be their outflow treatment from their sewage treatment plant. They're facing increasing maintenance in that area as the erosion continues. Not only that, they'll see erosion that I mentioned before as it moves up the beach through Ocean Park and into Old Orchard itself. Scarborough sees damages with a persistent shoaling at the mouth of the Nonsuch River. They see eroded beaches on the north side. They also have a ferry beach. They're required to do frequent dredging to maintain the channel at a cost of $5 million a pop. And it seems to be a line item in their budget for about $1 million a year because the frequency is at that level. So they also face lost tax revenues. When you take a look at the economic summary of the area between the Biddeford ESA and the Portland Suburban ESA, there's a total of $250 million that takes place during the summer with our summer visitors and what they spend here. That does not include anything that takes place at the mall or Portland proper, which is another large number. The city of Saco is trying a three-pronged approach. The first two are the city plan and then the legal action that is taking place by another organization. We're looking to partnership. The city of Saco is looking to partnership with the communities around the bay and inform our representatives at the state and federal level, along with the governor, of the situation, so that we can get federal action and resolution to the issues that exist. The legal action is being taken is underway by beachfront property owners who are suffering losses from their beach or their property. I'd like to point out that although that neither the city nor the state could initiate any of this legal action, they both suffer damages as well and are available or can participate as constituents. There's also the Saco Bay SOS group, which is grassroots support from the citizens, and hopefully it will be from all of the communities that are involved. Currently, the mainstay is the Saco Bay community. We had a projected timeline, and we're really not on it anymore. We had hoped to be, at this level, putting a regional team together. However, we're still involved with communicating with the cities, getting them involved in what's going on. Elections and so on certainly have not helped that situation. But things are moving forward, and we'll be meeting with them in the near term. We would like to see a committee formed that involves members from each of those communities. It would involve our state and federal representatives, along with technical support from Maine Geological, University of New England, and have the whole process led by Southern Maine Regional Planning. Our goals are to look at the damage that's being done, get resolution for that damage, whatever that may be, and it may be other than is on the table already or has been suggested by any of the entities involved, and just improve the area, maintain the property values, and maintain the cash flows that are for the communities, and maintain the property so that it can be used by our summer visitors. And with that, I'll open it to questions.
Any questions for Rick? This presentation, Representative Gramlich.
Yes, ma'am.
Rick, this was really helpful. Thank you so much. Do we have any idea of two questions that are somewhat related with regard to dredging? And I'm just curious about what the cost of that project, that one that happened last year that produced the 68,000 pounds of...
It was on the order of $5 million?
Yeah, for
Yeah, someplace in that range.
Okay, that's great.
Thanks, Pat.
Thank you. And then, do we know, and it might be a bigger picture conversation, what, if any, the implications of dredging itself causes?
The dredging that's taking place is to maintain the federal channel here in Saco. So there are implications as far as boat traffic is concerned. Environmentally, the only time the dredging can take place is during the winter months. And that's regulated by DEP.
Thank you.
Any addition to that?
Well, in terms of the South River dredge, there was the other component of that was the beach management component, which was viewed as a win situation as far as trying to nourish the beach. So that was sort of the happy side effect of that dredging. But we do look at dredging, and we do the main concern for dredging project, any dredging project, is the timing.
Thank you.
The only thing I'll add to that is there is another federal project off in the Scarborough River at the northern end today that it dredged approximately every 5 to 10 years. You get about 100,000 cubic yards of material comes out of that dredge. And once that material is taken and shipped back down to Saco, back in the late 90s, and then dumped offshore. So usually that material is dredged down to the Scarborough River and placed on Western Beach. There's 2 federal projects in Saco Bay.
Other questions from Rick?
Just
A quick question, Rick. The house that was lost in 2019, that was before the dredging occurred and the sand was put there?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
I actually had a question. So in reference to this coordinated effort to try to include Old Orchard Beach, Scarborough, surrounding neighbors.
You had mentioned we've had some hiccups. Obviously, we've had, a transition of new folks on the council, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's a little bit better. What communication have we officially sent out to, like, the town manager of Old Orchard Beach to be part of this newly formed group, or to attend, the Shoreline Commission, or some sort of coordinated, response? Because it seems like they're right down the street.
I'm going to defer to the mayor.
So, thank you for that question. We, in picking up where the previous mayor left off, we are looking at going before the Biddeford City Council on Tuesday, the 3rd of March. We are also just have a meeting with the council chair in Old Orchard and city town manager in Old Orchard for the 6th. So we are moving the process forward, but we really wanted to sit down with the congressional aides, as Bryan and I did last week or the week before, and then have this meeting before we kind of moved forward. I do want to point out that Rick's done an excellent job with the PowerPoint presentation, and what you saw today was an abbreviated version of that PowerPoint presentation. There's far more slides, and I'm sure we could share that with anybody that wants that.
And Mr. Mayor, just a follow-up to that. So that's great that you have scheduled those two meetings. Is the goal still to have this newly formed mitigation regional group, aside from the existing commissions that we have within the city of Saco? Is it to still form this regional entity, like stakeholder group?
So that is as you have on the agenda, you have a resolution from council, and that resolution was presented last year and approved by the city council, and that is the path that I am still on as the mayor. I am looking at an additional path, because I think we can run two parallel at the same time, to revive discussions with the Army Corps of Engineers for the Section 111 project.
Any other questions for Rick?
I would like to just add, there is no way forward without involving the Corps. The jetty belongs to them. They're the only ones who can do anything to it. So anything that we do in the future is going to have to either involve or go through them, and that includes the suit, legal action, excuse me. Thank you.
In talking with Senator Chenette previous to this meeting, I think all of this should go through the Saco Shoreline Commission, because that's the kind of mission for that group, is to advise all parties on shoreline erosion and Camp Ellis projects. So the Shoreline Commission is our go-to source for recommendations.
Pat?
I think it's just worth noting that of the 68,000 cubic yards of sand that were placed north of the jetty, greater than 2/3, that's a very conservative, greater than 2/3 of that sand is gone from that location that it was placed. So in what is probably the quietest fall and winter storm year I can remember over the last decade, that sand did not stay there for any measurable period of time. I mean, it will be almost completely gone in less than 1 year.
Wow. Other questions on that piece or comments? Mr. Mayor, you want to stay on that topic of the resolution? Was there anything else you wanted to mention regarding the resolution besides, like, the working group that was needed?
Thank you. I believe the resolution speaks for itself. The resolution from the City Council is to move forward with action for the entire Bay and seek resolution for all the issues related to the Bay, not just the 25-foot section or 2,500-foot section that the Army Corps has kind of carved out. This is a much larger issue that speaks to a much larger problem, and we need to get all the stakeholders in play to solve that issue. So the resolution speaks for itself, and that's kind of what we're looking for.
Okay. Any comments, concerns, or questions regarding the council resolution? And we'll move on to the next topic. Okay. So the next piece is the letter from the feds that was received January 27th, 2020, sort of basically an update from the Army Corps. I don't know, Bryan, or who did somebody want to comment specifically? Yeah.
So as you can see in the letter, it's basically in effect they've shelved the project unless we want to reopen discussions. As Bill just mentioned, we did have a meeting last week with reps from our congressional delegation. I think we're going to be trying to set up a meeting with the Corps again to restart those discussions. We have, okay, and we haven't heard back yet, but we will. Okay. So the goal there is to obviously sit down with them, restart discussions, and pick up where we left off last year. Bill, anything?
No, Bryan explained it as well as I know it at this time. We are looking forward to opening up the lines of communication and revisiting the Section 111 project.
Any other comments from the federal reps on that subject? We're just going to be waiting for comment back from the Army Corps to set up that meeting.
You've asked for dates.
Ask for dates. Okay.
He said they're more than happy to come here, just trying to make sure everybody that is pertinent to the issue.
Okay, wonderful, to restart those conversations. Any comments, concerns, or questions regarding the letter from the Army Corps that we need to discuss or flush out? Okay, we'll move on to the next topic. Ferry Beach State Park erosion. Kevin from SOS Saco Bay had mentioned that we really want to make sure we're including a conversation regarding really the rapid pace of the erosion at Ferry Beach State Park. I know Representative O'Neill couldn't be here, but she sits on the committee that oversees State Park, so we'll definitely pass along concerns that she could also touch base with. But did anybody specifically want to delve into sort of where we're at with that erosion specifically? I think we had referenced a particular report that sort of articulated that. I think it was from the Maine Geological report, so maybe Peter, anything on that piece?
Rick started to talk about this a little bit, but I think one of the key points is that there is something that we've been monitoring over a period of decades, which is what we call the highest erosion point along the city of Saco shoreline. And if you go back in time, that highest erosion point was close to the jetty historically. And over time, that was about erosion of about 3.5 feet per year. And over time, looking at our more recent data, that erosion point has moved farther and farther northwards, up to about, and the peak right now is in the state park area where it's eroding at about 5 feet per year. And that's on data from 2005 to 2019 that we maintain as part of a database. That's one of the key take-home points. The other key take-home point is, from a long-term standpoint, there's something we call a nodal point. Just a nodal point. So imagine south of this nodal point is pretty much all erosion, and north of this nodal point is pretty much all accretion. And that nodal point along the Saco Bay shoreline has moved northwards. It's not up to Goose Fair Brook, but that nodal point has moved northwards up to about, there's a set of 4 or 5 properties where there's a seawall, right basically in the middle of the Saco Bay shoreline, that's where that nodal point has moved to now. Historically, that nodal point was much farther south, usually near north in Maine, and just a little bit farther northwards. So those two features have moved northwards over time. So it's just what I wanted to clarify right there in terms of the erosion.
And Peter, do we know it's the jetty specifically that's causing that rapid acceleration? Is it a couple factors that we can look at?
And Steve, Bob, pipe in when you'd like. But yeah, it's a couple of factors. So historically the sediment in Saco Bay is derived from erosion of the White Mountains and came down the Saco River and deposited sediment outside the mouth of the Saco River. When the jetty went in, it diverted that sediment over a mile offshore. So the sediment that is coming in is now being diverted a mile offshore and coming back to the beach much farther north than it ever has. And there's no new sediment besides what's being dredged and placed into that little pocket that comes into the system, basically over half of the city's shoreline doesn't get new sand naturally anymore, besides what's placed there when things are dredged. So it's a combination of factors. And then there's wave factors that we learned recently that focuses wave energy along the southern portion of the Saco shoreline. That also exacerbates these erosion issues. So sediment is still coming into the bay from the Saco River, but it's at a reduced rate. And there is relatively no new sediment that comes to the Saco shoreline except for about halfway up. So any of the sediment that is moving is being taken from the Saco shoreline and moving farther northwards up the bay. It's unclear to us as scientists if this nodal point that I'm talking about can move past, and you don't have an image of it, but there's a set of rocks off of about the center of the Saco shoreline, outcrops, that kind of stabilize the center of the shoreline there. It's unclear to us if this nodal point can continue farther northwards of that or not at this point.
So there could be like a stopping point.
Could be at least a slowdown point is what I would say.
Slowdown.
Yep.
Okay.
Whether or not it'll be a full stop, it's unclear. But I have an image of it and shared this with the Shoreline Commission at a presentation in December. So I just wanted to add that.
So how do we, obviously, as and I think the mayor had alluded to like multiple tracks to this, like how do we sort of mitigate this particular issue? You mentioned there's a multitude of factors, one of which being sediment, one of which probably is the jetty causing, the bulk of the issue too. Is there something that we can be doing aside from the long-term fix with the Army Corps that we should be looking at to try to mitigate some of those issues?
Sure. The one thing I will say that I've shared with the city before and many folks on the Shoreline Commission is you have what I consider to be a very successful project that was completed by the Ferry Beach Park Association in the restoration of that sand dune that is just north of the geotube. That was done in 2009 and has performed admirably considering how high the erosion rate is there. One of the recommendations we've continually had in the past is for similar projects that do not focus on the immediate seaward shoreline. In other words, you don't want to try to hold a dune right on the edge of the shoreline. We know that's not going to work. The erosion rate is too high. You build a dune ridge, whether it's through multiple contiguous properties, and that's when it's most effective, when it's done through multiple contiguous properties instead of just one property doing it. You build a back dune ridge in terms of bringing in sediment, planting it, and it helps stabilize the shoreline for a longer period of time than if you're trying to hold the seaward line. Because again, we don't have new sand that is coming to really feed the beach. So that, I think, is a successful project that could be transferable. We never thought it would last 11 years, and it has at the rate of erosion that's been there. So I think that's a good model that could be transferable in other areas if you can get homeowners working together to build a large dune ridge. Potentially, this is something that could be, and I don't want to speak for Bureau of Parks and Lands, but the state park would benefit from a dune restoration project as well. They have no dune left, really. They don't have a frontal dune ridge. You literally walk through pines and then you're on the beach. There's no ridge with dune grass. But that kind of project is relatively low cost. I think it was completed for about $29,000 and volunteer hours. A lot of volunteer hours where folks planted grass and folks have tended to it, and the city's taken good care of that.
Pete, what was the source of the sand for that?
It was trucked in. It was trucked in. I don't remember what gravel pit was used, but it was trucked in.
So the DEP has some, we regulate those sorts of activities, and dune restoration is something that, is allowed, and it's one of those soft technologies that we are in favor of as opposed to hardening the shoreline. And so our regulations do allow for these things. I mean, you have to consider the color and texture of the sand that you're bringing in. It has to match what's there. But if it's done properly, it can. It's basically buying time.
Yep.
It's not going to last forever, but it would be a short-term solution until some longer-term, maybe bigger scale solution comes along. And so there have been people in Saco that have taken advantage of our, it's an expedited permit process to allow for dune restoration, dune construction. And some have been more successful than others, but it's definitely worth pursuing.
And the last thing that I think should come for consideration, and we've talked about this before, if you remember our Saco Bay implementation team process with the Corps. As I mentioned earlier, there's a federal project in Saco and there's a federal project in Scarborough. One of the unique aspects of that is that the sediment in Saco Bay moves from south to north. So Saco sediment moves along, deposits itself along Old Orchard Beach, and eventually stuffs up the Scarborough River. So the Corps dredges the Scarborough River. There's a unique opportunity. There's this consideration for a regional approach, where in working with the Corps and working with the city of or town of Scarborough potentially, where Scarborough is dredged a lot more frequently than the Saco River is, that the sediment there could be potentially dredged, and instead of placed in the Scarborough shoreline, maybe it could be recycled down to the southern end of the bay. This is something called regional sediment management, and the Army Corps of Engineers has programs to support that, but they're usually on a multi-million-dollar, tens of millions of dollar scale, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of cubic yards of material they talk about when they typically do these programs. But there was discussion a long time ago of potentially exploring whether an RSM project would make sense in Saco Bay because of the fact that Saco is eroding so badly, Scarborough is gaining sand most of the time, and Scarborough is being dredged at a much more frequent interval, and a lot more sand is being removed from the system when they're doing that than in Saco. And does it make sense to look at a regional sediment management program in Saco Bay? So that's another recommendation that I think you're talking about, this regional approach that should be at least talked about and looked at a little bit further.
And I'll just add that the Corps will look at it from a benefit to cost perspective as well. And the one time the sand was brought down from the Scarborough, I pressed them to put it offshore of Camp Ellis. And that cost probably an additional $1 million to bring it down to the southern part of the bay. So there's going to be the economic angle that needs to be looked at in addition to that. But if they can forestall dredging in the Scarborough, and then maybe the benefit and the cost could work out over time. We're also monitoring that sand placed offshore, and we'll have a different recommendation, placing it closer to shore if it's to come south again.
And to initiate an RSM, what would that process look like? Is it the town to the Army Corps? Is it the state to the Army Corps? Is it a combination? Is it an application process? Are you familiar with that?
In the past, it's been initiated from within the Corps themselves, and it's been in the other Corps districts around the United States rather than here in Maine. The New England district did toy with this idea, and we discussed it with them, but I don't think they were able to compete nationally. But then if there's a reason to do an RSM project within each Corps district or something like that, there might be an opportunity that this would be their flagship demonstration project.
But if this was something of interest state and local-wise, we could reach out to the Army Corps simultaneously while this other project is happening and suggest that this is something that we would be interested in looking at?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a Maine dredge team meeting coming up in Augusta in March, March 13. So I'm thinking, I've certainly seen this in the case of other municipalities where they'll go and get on the agenda and kind of just get some face time with the Army Corps, particularly the group that does the navigation dredging. And maybe that would be an avenue to.
Do you have those details of the meeting that you could send along? Okay, and then we can send to the city staff as well. Okay.
Yeah, it probably does. That's usually the mechanism where this stuff gets discussed. So.
And then, so the city of Saco can get on the agenda for that, potentially that March.
I don't know. I guess it's too late, but I can get the information out. It's this meeting is coordinated by the DOT in Augusta.
Okay.
There's two every year. They have two, one in the spring, one in the fall.
Okay.
The fall ones are always at our office at the DEP. But it's a great way to just see all the players, basically.
I think it's easy to step in at the end because the agenda has a other business section.
Yeah, so,
Right.
I mean, I'll forward,
Yeah, you're on
I can
those
just forward
calls,
the
yeah.
email.
Okay, that would be great. I think that might be something of interest we can pass along. I want to also go back to, so these are two very helpful things that you brought up. The restoration of the sand dune, that successful project that could be transferable that you mentioned, Peter. Is that something that the city at some point has talked about expanding, seeing that we have a successful example of how we could maybe coordinate with Pat? Yeah.
We have, actually. So 6 or 8 years ago, I would say 20 to 25 residents along our shore all got together and did, now, a lot of them were trying to, some of them didn't have the dune space to go back, so they were doing a lot of beach scraping as their sand source to help keep costs down. Some of these individual property owners were paying $5,000 to $10,000 maybe for their frontage to one contractor. They saved mobilization of all sorts of different contractors coming in and out. The permitting, I think, was pretty streamlined by DEP to sort of look at them collectively, which helped. The city participated. We actually sort of jumped on board to do our beach walkway areas so there weren't vulnerable points within. So we did try to take that a step further after that. So the problem was, because they didn't go back from where the dune was, and they tried to sort of recreate a lot of them were left with a 3 to 5 foot vertical drop off on the front of their dune. They tried to put that back to match the beach slope. And they did do a good job of matching the beach slope, which they were hoping wave run up would kind of go over the top of that and maybe even bring sand in different situations. Unfortunately, a lot of them lost that within a year. And it quickly dropped from about 20 residents that were willing to go through that exercise again down to probably 4 or 5, maybe up to 6 or 8 have done it 3 times since then. Sometimes it lasts 6 or 8 months, like our 68,000 cubic yards of sand that's gone, and other times they might get 2 or 3 years out of it. We did work with Ransom Engineering out of Portland. Bob Gerber, correct? Bob Gerber looked at it for us, and he looked at what it would take to have a substantial, a dune system that would sort of hold up, and the prices were, I would say the prices of that study that was done 5 years ago did not come back as something that many private homeowners would take on themselves. Right. And he actually thought, due to the dynamics of the bay, that dune would really need some sort of core, like a geotube or something to hold it, unless you retreated so far that you were actually removing homes to create it. If you tried to utilize the space between the existing homes and the beach, he thought to have substantial benefit, you needed to have a core to it, and then that just took the costs and put them exponentially higher.
But then also the permitting was
not,
questionable.
So, and forgive me, I'm just trying to process as we're speaking about this. Why is it then that the restoration of the sand dune at Ferry Beach is 11 years running so successful, but yet when we try to be transferable to homeowners, there's a disconnect?
I think a lot of it is because they rebuilt the back dune ridge, not a front dune ridge. All these other projects focused on restoring something right along the front, and that's the first line of attack, and the system doesn't have enough natural sediment in it to support the maintenance of a large front ridge. That's the big difference in my mind.
Yeah, it's the footprint that was available between Surf Street and the erosional edge of the dune. And so there was room sort of on the back slope of the frontal dune to put that in. And as we were saying earlier, the frontal dune at Ferry Beach State Park is gone. So now that elevation that provided flood protection also is gone. And we've seen in 2018 that the dune at the Ferry Beach that went in prevented flooding of Surf Street right behind it. So it actually did provide some flood protection and pretty low maintenance.
The other aspect that I think lends itself to a slightly more successful rate for this project I spoke about is that the city, I don't know if it's still a condition of the permit, but for a long period of time, the city had to maintain sand over the geotubes. And that placement of sand on an annual basis helps feed the adjacent shoreline, which is right where that Ferry Beach Park Association dune was. So it limits some of the losses that occur. There's no doubt about that. And you could speak more about how much material has been placed over the years.
We were placing, we were placing Actually had, back in that time, we were averaging about 1,800 cubic yards of sand
A year.
in that location.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there was a lot of sand being pumped into the system, much like what we've seen with the movement of that 68,000 cubic yards of sand. The geotubes don't have to be covered anymore because that's the sand that's covering them now and is benefiting those dunes on a very short-term basis, I would say, because that supply just can't continue.
Peter, did you say in your presentation that indeed you are seeing very short-term effects of 68,000 moving more from
Yeah, I have a series of photos that are provided to the Saco Shoreline Commission, which detailed kind of what happened with the nourishment, but the nourishment, which was placed right in the first, several hundred feet adjacent to the jetty, between March and October, it eroded 50 feet. But what happened is, so think about it, was placed, this large slug of sand was placed right in between. Here is the normal beach, and here's, sorry, I apologize, where the jetty is. This big slug of sand was placed here. It went like this, if you can imagine. So this eroded, but the whole section of beach, probably out to near the geotubes, actually gained sediment. So it actually is, it's doing what we call it's equilibrating. It'll go from a shape like this and become straight. And in doing so, you're losing the sediment here, but that sediment is actually going along the beach. So there was a significant benefit over that period of March to October. And then there was a lot of subsequent changes down near Goose Fair Brook, where some sediment and wood chips, you probably remember the wood chips, that area grew out substantially, but then there's a trough that formed there too, and that has to do with dynamics associated with Goose Fair Brook. But there definitely was a benefit to the beach system for a period of time, because if you didn't put that big slug of sand there, I mean, the seawalls are, exposed dramatically, and when that big slug of sand was placed there, a lot of them were covered up for a long period of time, and that beach grew, I'm trying to look at some of the numbers, probably about 25 feet or so seaward, for all the way up to past North and Maine, and then down to about where the geotubes are. So,
I would like to point out from personal observation that since we've had the dredge material and its redistribution, there has been a significant decrease in the splash over and the wave action along the armored portions of the shoreline. And I think that could be backed up by shoreline residents, which I am not one of shoreline, but I can certainly see it from my house. So we used to see the water splash over at the end of the street, and it didn't need much of a storm. And it's been a while since I've seen splash over, although March and April are not here.
True.
Thank you.
Any other comments, concerns, or questions regarding Ferry Beach in particular before we move on? Looking around. Okay. So we're going to jump right into expectations from the city. And feel free, anybody from the city can jump in. I think it's really important to understand from the city standpoint of what we're looking for from help from either DEP, another state agency, the governor's administration, or the legislature. It could be a combination of those things, but just having an understanding of what you guys are looking for, we can then better assess of how we can help through that process. Historically, our legislative delegation has been told in the past to kind of be hands-off, just because of the delegate nature of working with the Army Corps, but I think we've all seen how we need to be more involved in this process. And so we're looking for really direction from the city of what we can do to help. And so any specifics that we can identify either today or moving forward would be really helpful. Is there anything from the city that would be helpful, particularly talking to DEP, or any thoughts on this topic?
Bryan, I'll take it, I guess. Okay. So thank you for the question. previous to the resolution, the council was really looking for the state to be part of the non-federal sponsor for the Section 111 project. However, the council passed a resolution that said we would like to deal with the entire bay issues, which we talked about earlier today. As part of that effort, where the state could come in is help us, as we build that team, as we get other communities involved, working with the state to put more pressure on the governor, to put more pressure on the federal delegation to get monies that's going to be needed for the entire Bay projects. So this is not something that will happen overnight. This is a longer term plan for the entire Bay, the entire 7 miles stretch. The Section 111 project, the city is, as I pointed out earlier, we're looking to reopen discussions with the Army Corps, and we don't know where that'll go. So at this point, we don't have any expectations from the state on that other than when it comes time, your support. But as far as the larger plan, we will need the governor's office, we will need the state legislators, we will need everybody to come together to put pressure on the federal government for more money to fund the entire program, or to fix the entire problem along the 7 miles. Lori?
That's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Do we have any idea, when we talk about restoration and looking at that entire 7 mile stretch of the bay, of when we say money needed, what ballpark are we talking about with regard to how much that is?
Unfortunately, that's a delta that's unknown at this point. We don't know what the numbers will be as we start to move further down that line of getting other communities involved and forming this team and working with our Shoreline Commission. We can start to work with the Army Corps and get those numbers, and I'll defer to Rick for anything else.
I believe when the process gets resurrected and the Corps gets involved, the first step is going to be, unfortunately, more analysis. Only they'll take what has already been completed and they will expand it to look at the entire bay, and a plan will be developed from there. So at this point, your guess is as good as mine as what the resultants are going to be.
Thank you both. And there's, I'm sure, people sitting around this table and others who may be well aware of this. And my colleagues in the legislature know I'm kind of like the squeaky wheel. There is a report, there are 2 reports that have outlined, and the most recent one is the 2017, I know Peter, you were involved in this, the 2017 beach report, where there are a series of recommendations. Recommendations that were carried over from the 2006 beach report that were not implemented by the department, so that they were updated in 2017. There were some partial recommendations that were implemented, but there's a whole list of others that were not. And included in that report are some financial estimates about how much some of these projects will cost. They're not cheap. Right. And so it's really challenging, if I just kind of look at the very narrow view of my district in Old Orchard Beach, there's no way that our municipality is going to be able to afford to do any of these, implement any of these recommendations at all, solely by ourselves. So I think it's really imperative that we do have these kind of partnerships, and we do look at what we can garner from our allies, at the federal level, and certainly through this administration and in the governor's office. I know that it's been a big priority of hers to address issues relative to climate change and look at some of these issues specifically, but there are some really, in my opinion, I've read that report front and back, and I've gotten notes, and it's earmarked, and I've highlighted it, and I know more about it than I thought I ever would know, and I'm not a scientist. I think there's some really good information in there, and I would suggest respectfully that we don't recreate the wheel if we don't need to, because there's great information and there's money that has been targeted for what this might cost.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, Pat.
I just want to, when we talk about state partnerships, I just want to thank DEP and Maine Geologic for the work that they have done, the interest that they've shown. I mean, I work very close. Sometimes they feel like colleagues to me here as a city staff member because I can call and bounce ideas off of them. They understand at the staff level that Camp Ellis is a unique place, and it's very hard to take the most erosive 3,000 feet of the Maine coastline and fit it into all of the way the existing laws are written. I've come to have full appreciation for soft measures to affect wave energy, but there's simply, when you have 3,000 feet of rock feeding into a dune replenishment project, you need a transitional zone, and I think we've at least, we all represent different portions of that debate. I'm just thinking purely of protecting our roads and infrastructure, and they're trying to respect the aspects of the whole bay. But I think the working relationship has been very strong, so I'm hoping that continues, and I think it is a long-term thing. We're going to be looking at seawalls, geotubes, dunes, abandoning more roadways and making that tough decision of how much room do you actually have to retreat. Those are the things that we're facing it seems like every 2 years really in Saco right now, is which homes are going to be there, which roads are going to be there, how many more dead-end streets are we going to have, how do you get emergency vehicles there, where do you take down all the overhead power, and they've just been a great resource for me, and I think we've worked very collaboratively on how to address that within the confines of the state laws, but then also 5 or 6 years ago, we had a lot of working sessions which actually led to some new laws related to Camp Ellis maintenance of the seawalls. So while there's certainly room for new partnerships, and then the funding piece is for Saco to comply with the Army Corps' current project, just comply with the maintenance requirements moving forward would cost more than we put into all of our city assets on an annual basis for a capital plan.
I believe you.
So not sustainable, and we need to find new avenues and new funding mechanisms, but I think the partnerships that we have now on the immediate things have been a very strong aspect of otherwise stagnant progress.
And it seems like by the end of the year, we're supposed to have some concrete, sort of a comprehensive recommendation list from the Maine Climate Council that is, a big bulk of that is going to be community resiliency. And I think you kind of alluded to that, Pat, in trying to see how can we get funding mechanisms, maybe from the state, maybe in the form of a state grant, which I think Representative Gramlich had alluded to, that one of the beach reports, Florida has a very extensive beach nourishment and replenishment program. It's a grant program that the beach report had indicated as a potential example for the state to actually adopt something similar, that the city of Saco, Old Orchard Beach, surrounding areas, any coastal community could theoretically apply for. So we're still cranking away, as Peter knows, on the Maine Climate Council, trying to get to what this comprehensive plan for our state looks like, but we should have these recommendations ready for December for the new legislature coming in January, and then at least that list can give Saco and this entire regional team that we're assembling sort of an idea of what state level support we could give in addition to, in parallel with the Section 111 project.
Thank you.
Other comments, concerns, or questions? Yep.
So I appreciate Patrick's comments about our collaboration work with the city over the years, and so the Maine Geological Survey, and I'm sure the DEP would remain fully committed to working with the city and with the region on trying to resolve these erosion problems, and to work with the federal government to try and, have them address in a meaningful way the erosion caused by the jetties. And, a lot of different strategies might be employed across the region. Soft restoration projects, beach replenishment, some limited structures, as the city of Saco has already done, and then looking at properties that might just have to be sacrificed. I mean, Rick always hates it when I talk about that, but there might be,
No, I don't.
We need to look at all the strategies, trying to resolve this problem. So, but we'll be there to work with you
in whatever form this ends up, either as a regional team, or still working with just the city of Saco.
Thank you for that commitment. I also want to thank the congressional delegation's aides that have joined us here today and all the work that they've done in partnership with the city and the further work, the meeting that we had last week and their commitment to seeing this thing through to the end. So just want to make sure that we thank everybody because, once again, we're all a team and we're all in this together and we've got to find the best way forward for all parties. And I think as part of our reach out program that I've spoke with Rick and some Shoreline members about, part of that reach out program is looking at a regional dredge program. There was a study done in 2017, 2018 through the SMPDC that talked about a regional dredge program based on the Cape Cod model. And I think we need to revisit that and look at that for all the communities in this area. And I think that'll be helpful overall.
So just to recap on this particular section of our meeting, for city expectations, we're building a regional team effort with area communities to coordinate our community resiliency and response efforts, and then are also looking for the state to help and assist with pressuring the feds to move forward on some sort of resolution with the Section 111 project. We will wait on the subsequent meetings before we do that. Okay, so we have those two. Did I miss anything regarding those two expectations? Oh, and then I guess the third expectation would be potential state funding if there's some sort of grant level program that comes out of the Maine Climate Council or subsequent work on the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, which is coming. Did I miss anything in terms of the city's expectations moving forward?
I would reiterate and add that it's a unique opportunity when there is a federal dredge that occurs, and going back to the regional sediment management concept, every time there's consideration of some kind of federal activity as it relates to dredging in Saco Bay, this committee that we're talking about should definitely start weighing in on those conversations and in consideration of having that regional approach to managing sand in Saco Bay, because I think that might be really one of the ways to tackle some of these problems without having to depend solely on, say, a state bond for dredging, or because they're very, very expensive projects and the Corps does them all the time. So piggybacking on efforts that are already underway, I think there should be a lot of focus on making sure that anytime they're done, the result of the dredge and also wherever the material is placed is optimized in a way that can benefit the bay as a whole, not necessarily just one section of the bay.
And that's a great segue into sort of next steps. And I really want to make sure we drill down to what are our actionable steps moving from this meeting so there's some action that takes place. So it looks like there's two things that we've identified in the next month we can do. One, there is a dredge meeting on March 13th in Augusta we need to get in front of to talk about, as Peter suggested, this regional approach to dredge management, potentially getting some of our sand from Scarborough back to us. What a concept. And so figuring out how we get in front of them and making sure. And so Marybeth is going to send along that information.
Patrick has actually gone to one or two of these meetings.
The dredge meeting?
Yes. Are you going, you're not part of this next one?
I wasn't planning on being at this one, but
Okay.
I will talk about
I just thought I'd mention it, but I will.
No pressure, Pat.
I will forward the email to you, Senator.
Thank you. So we'll get that information. Doesn't have to be Pat. We can figure out a coordination strategy of how we get in front of that group. And then the second point, as the mayor alluded to, conversations with regional communities and partners that want to be part of this regional erosion mitigation group. So it looks like by the end of March, we'll have attended this dredge meeting. We'll have a better sense of maybe Army Corps willingness maybe to at least look at this replenishment strategy with the dredge, and then also at least have the list of stakeholders that are going to be part of this regional erosion mitigation group. So are those two, oh yeah, Kevin.
Well, I think the conference of the federal delegation have the Army Corps commit in March or something like that.
Absolutely, that's a great one. So the third one would be that federal delegation working to get this meeting with the Army Corps. Anything else for actionable next steps besides those three? Those are three big ones for March. Kevin, yeah.
I want to jump on, go forward with maybe it was a good point about different paths to take. One specific, very specific state is contact with whoever in the state is part of state parks. Is get this point emphasized that the major erosion actually skipped past Ferry Beach property onto the state park. I mean, that presentation, I still can't get that out of my head from summer. The graph showed the huge erosion happening in state parks. I think that going. Also, again, pursuing the Army Corps' specific plan, Section 111 plan, is a path, but that does not rule out pursuing other avenues that we just talked about. I'm going to go back to the 2015 report because it mentioned all sorts of costs, more use there, that will cover that delta of more funding. This doesn't stop the federal delegation from pursuing more funding year after year after year going forward. And then in a separate path, staying on the stage to see if they could sign on the PPA, the project marshal agreement, on this particular Section 111 plan, while knowing that the state will also support other liabilities that the Army Corps will have going forward that we can pursue. But in this current plan, with the future sand replenishments to damage happening up the coast of the Woodruff and stuff. Anyway, so again, separate paths. It's not all trying to converge the next year or two. It's focusing this path and also focusing on state and other communities as well.
So Kevin, just to clarify, so on the state parks piece, what are we specifically looking for? Are we looking for a response? What do we need from them?
Almost from them to say, yeah, it's an emergency. We are losing revenue, which is always not money too, but we're losing ecological, environmental, we're having a catastrophe in the state park. And of course, this happened at other state parks, federal parks, like Acadia, there's certainly the attention. This is
So like an awareness. Yeah.
So the parks is part of my department, agriculture, conservation, and forestry. So I'll have a discussion with Andy Cutco, who's the director, just to bring up this as a point of concern and talk to him about what their what their concerns are. I'm sure they're quite aware of this erosion and just have this open discussion about possible solutions and engagement in the whole process.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still really early. Or presented within the Senate.
Yeah.
Strong. So, but we're just at SOS. We're definitely looking by summer. The year 2020 year of action. So, not having the state park fully engaged, up to that point. Right now,
And maybe somebody from Parks can be part of these conversations from a regional component too, it seems, besides Maine Geological, obviously. Okay. Other actionable steps, that was great, Kevin. Any other actionable steps that we missed that we're wanting to add? Because we're making notes. We want to make sure we have a list, a to-do list. Looking around, everyone feels confident in that list. Now's your chance. Forever hold your peace. Okay. Lori, did you want to talk a little bit about your bill and the status of it?
Yeah, sure. So, I live right on Camp Ellis on Orchard Beach. I'm about half a mile to Ocean Park, so we walk down there all the time. And over the past 8 years, just anecdotally, we've seen what we think is pretty significant erosion. So right after I got elected, I didn't even know that I'd be serving on the environmental committee. I put this bill in an act to protect Maine's beaches and shoreline. And I was referred to the 2 beach reports that we talked about here today. I'm not going to reiterate that. But the long and the short of it is, last legislative session, my bill got carried over. There were a lot of folks that had legislation in to address some of these issues and address climate change who opted to kill their bills in lieu of the governor's climate change task force. I opted to keep my bill alive. And I'm going to be very clear and very candid. While I'm in full support of the governor's initiative relative to climate change and certainly specific to beach erosion, there won't be a report out until the end of this calendar year, and there won't be legislation that will be submitted until the next legislative session. So it's going to be quite some time before we see a final product. So I feel very strongly that my bill is an avenue and an opportunity to really be proactive in addressing some of these issues in a more timely manner. So one of the things that this bill will hopefully do is take some very specific, what I consider low-hanging fruit recommendations that doesn't have a big fiscal note to it, because as we've discussed, these are very expensive endeavors to try to mitigate some of what we're talking about here. So this particular bill, for example, is it Marybeth? Is that? Marybeth, thank you. You had already kind of identified some of the responsibilities that the department has relative to permitting. So I know my colleague on the environmental committee, Senator Foley, had been very, very active and involved in the beach report, and his example is there's a gravel pit in his town of Wells. You've heard the story. And so the point being is that each municipality may have a variety of solutions at their avail, but it's been challenging to try to implement those. And so my bill provides an opportunity to have the department be more at the ready to kind of give the green light, so that we can have the municipalities with the tools in their hand to
Actually, I was on that committee with Bob.
Yes.
So he did highlight that, and certainly that's something that we should all be trying to coordinate these things. And so I hope that it moves forward.
It did.
There's a lot of work put into that.
There's a lot of
prioritizing the beaches and
yeah, there was a lot of great work. That's why I'm just going to keep banging the drum on that beach report. If folks haven't had an opportunity to review it, I highly recommend it. And if anybody needs a copy, I can send it electronically to folks. So my bill looks at how we can enhance our relationship with the department to assure that municipalities have the tools that they need to do what they're able relative to replenishment. There are a whole host of other recommendations that are included in that beach report that my bill doesn't necessarily tackle because of the fiscal note. So the bill did pass unanimously out of the environmental committee. We're just pending some language review, and it'll go to the House and the Senate floor, and hopefully, it'll pass and get signed into law. It's a very, 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 very small step in a bigger picture initiative, but it's a step in the right direction, and I think it's something that we can build upon. I know that another one of my colleagues, and we're just going to talk a little bit about pending legislation, I know another one of my colleagues has a $50 million bond that is specific to addressing coastal erosion that is sitting on the special appropriations table. And I did speak with the governor's director on climate change, Chellie Pingree. She's well aware that this bill is sitting there. It's not the end all, but it is, again, another financial resource that might be at our avail to begin to mitigate some of these issues. One of the things that was not included in my bill, because it is a more expensive prospect, and I think you all have kind of talked a little bit about it, is the dune restoration. Just kind of putting sand in a place doesn't, and we heard some of the stories where, within 8 months or a year, work we did is gone, and the financial implications that this has on our towns, it's huge. And so dune restoration and kind of building up that vegetation is a more long-term approach, but that's a more expensive approach. So I'm willing to continue to pull up my sleeves and try to do some work around this, but I think my bill is a really good, a unanimous approval out of our committee, which is very encouraging in the legislature.
Anyone to say? Okay, so I know we run way over time, but I think this was a really helpful conversation. Mayor, did you want to say anything to kind of wrap up or close out?
Just want to thank everybody for being here again, everyone for coming out and sitting with us as we went over time. And I just want to thank Justin again for doing his great work up at the State House on behalf of the City of Saco. I want to thank Donna again for doing her great advocacy on behalf of Saco up at the State House and putting putting this thing together, so thank you.
Any final comments, concerns, or questions as we move forward? Representative Graham.
I don't know enough about it, but I want to put this on the table for us to consider. It's my understanding there's a regional group that kind of got together, and the municipalities in southern York County, I think it's Wells, Kennebunkport, and I think there's maybe 2 others, you folks may know about it, where they've kind of gotten together to pool their collective brain power and resources to address some of these issues. I think that's the direction that we're now trying to take here with at least the tri-town area.
I think they actually hired a position.
They did.
Kittery up through.
Yes,
yeah.
Wells and Kennebunkport.
And I think they're sharing the position between those.
That's the impression I was under as well. I just say that out loud, so it's something that we might consider. I don't know why or why not these, Saco, Old Orchard Beach, and Biddeford weren't included, because we've heard and we know that these issues aren't specific to, one little town. I mean, it's really going to impact the entire coastline up, so I think it's really incumbent upon us to think of the ways that we can enhance our partnerships with our friends along the coast.
Okay, any other comments, concerns, or questions before we wrap up? Want to thank Marybeth for coming down from DEP and Maine Geological Survey, and everybody for spending time with us, including our federal delegation representatives. This is the first of many conversations that we've sort of restarted in terms of sort of a regional coordinated effort, and look forward to continuing to spread out information. We'll get some information surrounding the dredge meeting. We'll get an update regarding the list of stakeholders for this regional erosion group. There'll be a meeting with the feds, with the Army Corps, and then we'll work on getting the state parks more involved in Ferry Beach. All right, thank you, everybody.